They say dreams are harmless. But I've had one that's followed me since I was 10 years old. Not once a year. Not once a month. Every other week, without fail. It's always the same. In the dream, I'm walking through a corridor of stone statues, saints, angels, monks. Each one with faces chipped or smeared in something dark. They whisper. Not with mouths, but with breathless sounds that crawl into my ears like worms. I can never understand the words, only feel the weight of them. The corridor leads to a wooden door. Old, with iron bars and claw marks like an animal tried to escape. A thick red stain oozes from beneath. I reach for the door every time. And then I wake up, hand frozen in the air, heart kicking my ribs like it wants out. I've never told anyone about that dream. Not even the shrinks back in my 20s, when I was drinking too much and sleeping too little. But maybe I should have. Because the day I said yes to that job, I stopped dreaming altogether. It started with a message. Just a short email, sitting at the top of my inbox one gray morning in November. The subject line read, Restoration Opportunity, Remote Site, High Compensation. I was half asleep, sipping day-old coffee, and staring at bills stacked like tombstones on the table. I clicked the message more out of boredom than hope. But then I read the details. An old cathedral in a remote part of Romania needed immediate restoration work, specifically on its stained glass windows. 3-month contract. Room and board provided. The pay was generous, almost suspiciously so. There was no company logo, just a single line at the bottom. Those who seek the truth are always welcome at Sanctuarium Noctis. I read that line 3 times, and something stirred in me. Something I didn't recognize yet. I've worked on churches before. Old ones, abandoned ones, even some with histories darker than the paint on the pews. It's my thing. I restore glass, mostly religious art. Mary with the halo. The crucifixion. Doves and lambs and lilies. You name it, I've repainted it in light and lead. But this felt different. There was no portfolio required. No background check. Just a time, a date, and a promise that someone would be waiting at the airport in Cluj-Napoca. I wish I could say I hesitated, that I sensed something wrong and listened. But I didn't. I saw the money. I saw the silence in my apartment, the peeling ceiling, the half-empty fridge. And I replied simply, I accept. The nightmare stopped that night. Not gradually. Not quietly. Just gone. And for the first time in years, I slept like a child. I should have known that silence comes before the scream. 3 days later, I was on a plane, heading to a country I'd only read about in half-forgotten textbooks. Cold wind clawed at the airport windows as I landed, and the air smelled like wet stone and pine. The driver was waiting for me at the terminal exit. He held a crooked sign with my name written in shaky pen. He didn't speak much English, only enough to say, Sanctuary, long way. Very old. Then he handed me a flask without a label and made the sign of the cross. I didn't drink it. I just nodded politely, stashed it in my coat, and got into the van. We drove in silence. Through towns with shuttered windows and crosses nailed to trees. Through forests that grew thicker and darker the deeper we went. Around the 5th hour, the driver stopped without a word. We were at a fork in the road. One path well paved, the other a dirt trail swallowed by trees. He pointed down the dirt road and said one word. Church. I looked at him. Aren't you coming with me? He shook his head violently. No. No farther. Not when dark comes. I tried to laugh it off, but he wasn't joking. He handed me my bag and crossed himself again. I stepped out, and before I could say anything, he turned the van around and disappeared into the trees. I was alone. The wind howled through the woods like it had lungs. I zipped my jacket up and started walking. The dirt path narrowed quickly, barely wide enough for a cart. Every step felt heavier than the last. The trees leaned inward like they were listening. I saw something strange hanging from the branches. Ribbons of cloth, twisted symbols, bones tied with red string. My heart thudded louder than my boots. Then finally the fog parted and I saw it. The cathedral. It didn't rise. It loomed, as if the earth itself had grown it out of stone and sorrow. Massive black spires clawed at the sky. Crows circled its bell tower, which leaned slightly, as if tired of standing. There were no lights in the windows. No signs of life. But something was watching. I felt it in the cold, in the tremble of my fingers. The door creaked open on its own, and I stepped inside. I didn't sleep well the night before my flight. Not because I was nervous, but because the dream came back. The same corridor, the same door sealed shut with something that looked like dried blood. I could almost hear it breathing. I brushed it off like I always did. Just a dream, I told myself. But as the plane descended over the misty Carpathian mountains, I started to feel it again, that faint pressure in the chest. The kind that settles in when something's not right, even if you can't explain why. The village of Petrumer was exactly what you'd expect from an old Romanian town clinging to the edge of forgotten hills. Cobblestone streets, wood-shingled roofs, a silence that didn't feel peaceful but wary. The driver they sent to pick me up was an older man named Andre. Grizzled, barely spoke. His eyes kept drifting to the rearview mirror like he expected something, or someone, to be following us. When I mentioned the name of the cathedral, he stiffened. "You work at Sanctuarium Noctis?" he asked in a low voice. "Yeah," I said. "I'm restoring some stained glass windows there." He muttered something under his breath in Romanian. It sounded like a prayer. I didn't press him. The road got narrower as we drove. Trees pressed in tight from both sides, tall and hunched like old men with secrets. The sun had vanished behind thick gray clouds, and the forest swallowed the light. Even the birds stopped making noise. Every few minutes, we'd pass something strange. A small wooden cross nailed to a tree, bundles of twigs tied with red string, animal bones arranged in circles by the roadside. It was like driving through the pages of some ancient folk tale. The kind that doesn't end well. Then the car stopped. "This is far as I go," Andre said, eyes fixed ahead. I leaned forward, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's still a few miles." "I don't go beyond this point," he said, louder this time. "Not anymore." I looked down the dirt path stretching into the trees. It curved away and vanished into fog. "You can walk," he added, and stepped out to open the trunk. I almost argued, but something about the way he stood, arms crossed, jaw clenched, told me it wasn't just stubbornness. It was fear. I took my bag. He gave me a small flashlight and, for the first time, looked me in the eye. "Do not follow voices," he said, "even if they sound like someone you know." He got back in his car and drove away without another word. So there I was, alone, bag over my shoulder, boots crunching gravel, with only a dying flashlight and a long path ahead. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. There was no wind, yet the trees swayed. The air smelled like damp earth and old stone. Every so often I'd see a figure carved into the trees, not animals or saints, but strange humanoid shapes with elongated faces and mouths stretched open like they were screaming. The path forked once, but only one way was marked, a moss-covered wooden sign with the word Sanctuarium carved in fading Latin. The other path looked darker. I didn't even consider it. After nearly an hour of walking, the trees began to thin. And then I saw it. The cathedral. It rose out of the fog like it had been waiting. Tall, crooked towers. Gargoyles perched like vultures. Black stone cracked by time. Ivy clung to its surface like veins on pale skin. The stained glass windows were enormous, but not colorful, dark reds, smoky grays, deep purples. They didn't seem to let in light. They swallowed it. A long iron gate stood open, though no one was there to greet me. I stepped inside the courtyard, gravel shifting underfoot, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not quiet. Total silence. No wind. No birds. Just the sound of my own breathing. And then, from the tower above, a single bell rang. Once. The echo rolled through the valley, long and deep. It sounded less like a call to prayer and more like a warning. And yet, I kept walking. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The cathedral doors groaned as I pushed them open. And just like that, the world I knew was behind me. The door creaked louder than I expected when I pushed it open. It echoed into the silence like a scream swallowed by stone. Inside, the air was thick, dry, and carried the scent of age, like dust mixed with candle wax and something else. Something earthy, almost like the faint trace of rotting flowers. I stepped in, my boots clicking against the black and white checkered floor. The cathedral's interior stretched out like a cave built by giants. Pale shafts of light poured in through stained glass windows, painting the floor with fractured colors. But they didn't warm the space. Instead, it felt colder inside than it had outside. A tall man stood by the altar, his back to me. He wore a long black cassock that reached his ankles. His hands were folded, and his head was slightly bowed, as if in prayer or thought. "Excuse me," I said, my voice oddly small in the enormous room. He didn't flinch or turn right away. Instead, he slowly straightened, then turned to face me with a stiff, unnatural grace, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. "Carl." His voice was deep and calm, though it scraped slightly, like it hadn't been used in a while. "You made it." "Yeah," I said, unsure of how else to respond. "You must be Father Bernardo?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They were sharp and gray, the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. "Indeed. We've been expecting you." The word "we" stuck in my mind. I wanted to ask who else he meant, but something about the way he spoke told me not to press. He walked toward me with long strides. Though he was tall and thin, his steps made no sound on the cold floor. As he got closer, I noticed his skin, pale, almost colorless, and stretched tight over his face like parchment. His cheekbones were high, his mouth thin and unsmiling now. "You must be tired," he said. "Come, let me show you to your room." I followed him down a narrow hallway off the main sanctuary. The walls here were lined with old paintings, saints with sorrowful eyes and demons beneath their feet. One painting caught my attention. It showed a man kneeling before a black figure with horns, offering something in his hands. I couldn't tell if it was a heart or a tongue. Bernardo noticed me staring and paused. "Art tells stories," he said without turning. "Some truths are best told through silence and brushstroke." He moved on, and I forced my feet to follow. We reached a wooden door, plain and old, with iron hinges. He opened it and gestured inside. The room was small but cozy in a way. A single bed, a desk, and a small window looking out onto the courtyard. A worn rug covered part of the stone floor. The walls were bare except for one thing, a yellowed parchment nailed directly into the stone above the desk. I stepped closer. The edges were curled, and the ink looked faded but careful. In elegant cursive it read, "Rules for the guest of Sanctuarium Noctis. Do not leave your room between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Never speak to the man who stands by the statue in the South Hall. If you hear bells and no one else does, pray. Do not attend Mass unless personally invited. The cathedral chooses its own paths. Do not trust your memory. Never, under any circumstance, open the red door in the east wing. Should the candles go out on their own, do not relight them. If you see a figure with no face, do not run. Stay still. Do not blink." My heart thumped harder with each line I read. "This is," I started, turning to look at him, but he was already gone. The hallway outside was empty. Silent. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. Nothing. I closed the door and turned the latch. The room was cold, and despite the rug, the stone beneath my feet felt like ice. I tried to shake off the unease and sat down at the desk, rereading the rules. They read like part of a horror story, or maybe a joke someone forgot to finish. But something about the way they were written, the formality, the specificity, made my skin crawl. I unpacked a few things, then lay on the bed. I hadn't realized how tired I was until I closed my eyes. The long flight, the strange drive through the woods, the walk to the cathedral, it all caught up to me at once. Just before I drifted off, I thought about rule number 4. Do not attend Mass unless personally invited. That's strange, I thought. Isn't Mass supposed to be open to everyone? Then sleep took me, and in my dream the bells rang. But no one else heard them. I woke to the sound of stones shifting. It wasn't loud, not like rocks tumbling or doors slamming. No, it was subtle, like an ancient grind, the way an old tomb might creak open after centuries of silence. My heart knew it before my ears did. Something had changed. I sat up in bed, blinking against the dim yellow light from the cracked lamp on my nightstand. The rule sheet was still nailed to the wall across from me. My eyes scanned it automatically. Rule number 3, never enter the catacombs after midnight. I glanced at the antique clock by the window. The hands trembled slightly like they were cold. It was 12:41 a.m. So what was that sound? I rubbed my face, convincing myself I was still half asleep. Maybe the wind was pushing against the old stone. This place was built before plumbing, before electricity. It had secrets in its bones. But curiosity had been living in me since the moment I arrived, and tonight, it bloomed into something reckless. I pulled on my coat and slipped into my boots. The halls were colder than before, like the air itself had been peeled back. No sound, not even the usual groan of wood or flicker of candlelight. Just silence that seemed to press against me, waiting to see what I'd do next. The catacombs were behind a thick oak door near the altar. Bernardo had warned me on the first day. That door stays locked. Don't ask why. Tonight it was open. No lock. No latch. Just slightly ajar, with darkness leaking out like ink in water. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to bed and pulled the covers over my head. But instead I pushed the door open. The air changed instantly. It hit me like stepping into a freezer. My breath came out in clouds, and the walls, lined with bones, actual bones, seemed to shimmer with moisture. I descended the stone steps slowly, holding the rusted iron railing. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The beam cast long shadows on the curved walls. Skulls stared at me from every direction, some still bearing the bite of metal masks. Others had strange markings carved into their foreheads, symbols I didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted. I told myself I'd just take a quick look. 5 minutes. Then I'd leave and forget it ever happened. But then I heard it. A whisper. My name. Carl. It wasn't a question. It was a greeting. I froze mid-step. The voice came from ahead, beyond the final archway at the bottom. My flashlight dimmed again, like something unseen was drawing power from it. Who's there? I asked, my voice cracking. Father Bernardo? Silence. Then again whispered, but clearer this time. Carl, you're not supposed to be here. I stepped forward slowly. My boots crunched on gravel, or maybe bone dust. The hallway curved gently, and on the other side I saw a figure. He was tall, robed in black. His back was to me. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, perfectly still. Something about the way his robe hung, like it wasn't made of fabric but of smoke, as if his form was more suggestion than substance. I took a step back. He turned, and that's when I saw his face, or what should have been one. No eyes, just smooth, pale skin stretched where they should have been. No mouth either, just a long crack down the middle of his face, like a sealed wound. My knees nearly buckled. The thing tilted its head, like a bird hearing a distant call. Then, without warning, the crack on its face split open. Not a mouth, something else. Inside, I saw a spinning mass of whispers. Actual words, swirling in the air like smoke trapped in a jar. Latin, Hebrew, and other languages I couldn't recognize. They didn't come out as sound. They came as thought, piercing, direct, terrifying. One phrase stood out, repeated over and over in my mind. You broke the rule. Now you belong to the house. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed longer now. I swear it stretched behind me as I moved. The stairs felt like they sank under my feet, pulling me down instead of lifting me up. My flashlight blinked and died, leaving me in near total darkness. Something was following me. Not footsteps, something quieter, like the sound of breathing that wasn't mine, right over my shoulder. Cold fingers grazed my spine, though nothing touched me. When I burst through the door into the chapel, the candles were lit again. Everything looked the same, as if the catacombs had never existed. I slammed the door shut behind me. This time I locked it. Back in my room, I sat on the bed for a long time, shaking, staring at the parchment on the wall. The words burned in my mind. Never enter the catacombs after midnight. I whispered it aloud like a prayer, as if saying it could undo what I'd just done. That night, I didn't sleep, because just before dawn, something knocked on my door. 3 times. Slow, heavy, and then silence. I awoke to the sound of silence, so heavy, so unnaturally perfect, it made my ears ring. It was still dark outside, though I couldn't tell the time. The air felt colder than usual. My breath curled like smoke in front of me. The old radiator in my room had stopped humming. Everything had stopped. I didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, I was flipping through those dusty journals I found in the attic, each page filled with the nervous handwriting of men who no longer existed, and the next, I was lying fully dressed on top of my bed, boots still on, my hands clenched tight around the candle I'd left burning. A gentle, yet urgent knock echoed from outside my room. 1 knock, then 2, then 3, and then in the distance the cathedral bell rang. 3 times. Rule number 3, if the bell rings 3 times at night, come to the chapel. Do not delay. Do not speak. I stood frozen, the candle's flame trembling, as if it were afraid too. I didn't want to go. My mind told me to stay. But my body, it moved on its own. I opened the door. The hallway beyond was darker than usual, even with the candlelight. The stained glass windows were pitch black, like they'd been painted over. Every step I took echoed too loud, as if the cathedral was hollowing itself out to listen. Down the spiral staircase, the shadows seemed to press closer. The stone walls, usually silent, groaned as if the church itself were breathing in sleep. I reached the massive chapel doors and pushed them open. Inside, every candle on the tall iron chandeliers was lit. The light flickered, struggling to stay alive under the weight of something unseen. Father Bernardo stood at the front altar, his back to me. He was dressed in full black robes tonight, not the usual priestly white. He didn't turn when I entered, but somehow he knew. "You are on time," he said softly. I didn't answer. The rule said not to speak. I walked slowly down the center aisle. The wooden floor beneath me creaked with each step, even though I tried to move quietly. As I approached the first row of pews, I saw her. A woman, completely veiled in black, sat perfectly still in the front pew. I hadn't seen her come in. Her hands were folded, pale and thin, resting atop her lap. Her head was bowed low. The veil covered her face entirely, but something about her made my stomach tighten. She didn't belong here. Bernardo began chanting in Latin. His voice had a strange rhythm to it, like the words were being dragged out of him. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but something about the way the sounds echoed made my skin crawl. The air grew heavier. It felt like the room itself was thickening, like it wanted to choke me. The woman moved. Just slightly. Her head tilted a little, as though she was listening to me. My hands started to tremble. I looked at Bernardo. His voice grew louder. Angry, almost desperate. Then, suddenly, all the candles went out. One by one, like they were being pinched between fingers I couldn't see. I stood there in the pitch dark. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't even see my own hands. Then I felt it. Breath. On the side of my neck. Slow. Cold. Deliberate. And then something whispered my name. Not from Bernardo. Not from the woman. From right beside me. "Carl." I turned, gasping, swinging my candle in the air, even though it was useless. But there was nothing. Only the suffocating dark. Suddenly, the candles reignited themselves with a sharp hiss. Everything was as it had been. Bernardo still stood at the altar, arms raised. The woman in the pew hadn't moved. But I had. I was no longer in the center aisle. I was now standing inside the confessional booth, door open behind me, with no memory of walking there. Bernardo finished his chant. Slowly, he turned toward me. "The first veil has been lifted," he said. His eyes looked empty, too black, too deep, like looking into a well that had no bottom. I tried to speak, but my throat burned. My voice wouldn't come out. He stepped forward and laid a hand on my shoulder. It was warm, but not like a man's warmth. It was the kind of warmth that came from something buried deep under the earth. "Go back to your room, Carl," he whispered. "There are more nights ahead." I left the chapel without looking back. But as I closed the door behind me, I swear I heard the woman stand, and the floor groaned beneath her steps. She followed me in silence. Or maybe she never left the pew at all. Either way, that night I didn't sleep. Not even when the sun returned. Because I knew the sun didn't mean safety. Not here. Not in Sanctuarium Noctis. Not anymore. I woke up to the sound of wind moaning through the cracks in the cathedral walls. It was still dark out. I had no idea what time it was. My watch had stopped again, stuck at 3:33 a.m. I was sweating. My sheets were tangled. I'd had another dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I was standing in the chapel, staring at the man with no eyes, and he had whispered my name so gently it burned. I needed answers. Real ones. Not half-smiles from Father Bernardo or strange, riddled warnings from the villagers. Something solid. Something written down. I remembered the locked drawer in the small library upstairs. The one I hadn't been able to open. That morning, after forcing down a piece of stale bread and sipping lukewarm tea, I made my way up to the attic library. The door creaked the same way every time, like it was groaning under the weight of secrets. The room was filled with dust and the stale scent of forgotten paper. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting the floor in blood red and gold. I went straight to the drawer in the old oak writing desk. The lock looked ancient, rusted. I didn't even bother picking it. I kicked it hard with the heel of my boot. Once. Twice. On the third try it snapped open. Inside were 5 worn journals. Leather-bound. Some cracked and moldy, others surprisingly intact. Each one had a name written in the front. None of them were familiar. One read. Elias Merrick, June 1972. Another. Jameson Teller, October 1989. And the last one. Frederick Roche, April 2003. I flipped open Elias's first. The handwriting was neat at the beginning, each line full of detail. Day 1, arrived this morning. Father Bernardo greeted me. The church is more ancient than I imagined. Elias had been here to repaint the frescoes near the altar. He talked about the strange atmosphere, how even during the day the shadows seemed to stretch too long. He mentioned the rules. Said he broke one by accident. He cleaned the altar alone after sunset. His next few entries got shorter. Saw someone standing by my bed. Looked like me, but wrong. Voices in the walls. They say they live beneath. Can't sleep. Bernardo watches me too closely. Then the entries stopped altogether. The last page just had a single sentence, written over and over. I can't leave. I'm already buried. I felt cold all over. My hands shook as I turned the pages of the second journal. Jameson had come to fix the pipe organ. Same story, arrived, greeted by Bernardo, given the rules. But this time, Jameson had questions. The priest here, Bernardo, isn't who he says he is. He doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. He talks to someone who isn't there. He wrote about a hidden door behind the sacristy, one that wasn't always there. Said he opened it once during a storm and saw candles lighting themselves, rows of them stretching into a tunnel below the earth. He didn't go in. But the next night, he heard something knocking from beneath his bed. They want me to follow. They say I've been chosen. I think the rules aren't to protect the church from evil, but to protect me from the church. He vanished too. The third journal, Frederick's, was harder to read. The writing got more frantic as the pages went on. Scribbles. Ink blots. Pages torn. He kept mentioning a name over and over again, Veltsurith. He even tried to draw it, a shape like a beast coiled in smoke, its face hidden behind a dozen stitched mouths. His last entry had a chilling sentence. The man with no eyes showed me the truth. It's not a church. It's a cage. I dropped the journal. My stomach churned. The room felt like it was spinning, the stained glass colors pulsing like heartbeats. I stood up and staggered to the window, pushing it open for air. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted. Not once since I arrived. That was when I realized I hadn't seen another worker here. Not one. No painter. No repairman. Just me. And Bernardo. I took all 3 journals and stuffed them into my bag. I didn't want to leave them behind. I needed to compare what they saw with what I'd experienced. I needed to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. A 4th journal sat in the drawer now. I was sure I hadn't seen it earlier. Its cover was blank, no name. Just a red thread wrapped around it like a seal. I opened it. Inside was a page written in my handwriting. You've broken 3 rules already, Carl. He's coming. I dropped the journal, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Who wrote that? No one knew I had read the journals. No one had seen me in the attic. And yet, someone, or something, knew exactly what I'd done. I left the attic that day with my back against the wall the entire time, afraid to turn around. Afraid that if I did, I'd see him. The man with no eyes. He was closer now, and he remembered my name. The air was colder that morning. I hadn't slept much. After reading the last torn pages of the journal the night before, especially the part where the final entry stopped mid-sentence, I kept waking up to sounds I couldn't place. A faint dragging on the stone hallway outside my door. A muffled whisper beneath the floorboards. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but in my gut, I knew it was more than that. By breakfast, the silence in the cathedral was unbearable. Even the crows had stopped calling. I needed to get away, if only for a while, just to clear my mind. So I decided to visit the village down the hill. It wasn't far, maybe a 30-minute walk through the trees and uneven trails. Bernardo hadn't said much about the villagers, only that they are not to be disturbed. But the way he said it, like warning me about a sleeping dog with blood on its teeth. Still, I needed answers. About the rules. About this place. About why I kept dreaming of locked doors and bleeding walls. The path was narrow and slightly overgrown, like no one had bothered to walk it in years. As I walked, the wind moved through the trees in waves, almost rhythmic. Almost like breath. I passed a broken crucifix on the way down, its stone face shattered, arms missing. I stopped and stared for a moment, then kept moving. The village was smaller than I expected. Maybe 20 or 30 buildings, mostly stone, with red-tiled roofs and crooked chimneys. Everything looked old, older than old. There was a stillness to the place, like time hadn't bothered visiting in decades. The first person I saw was a man pulling water from a well. I raised my hand and called out, but he turned his back and walked away like he hadn't heard me. I tried again with a woman sweeping dust off her doorstep. She glanced at me briefly, then went inside and closed her wooden door. By the 4th silent encounter, I felt the weight of something invisible pressing down on the entire place. They weren't just unfriendly. They were afraid. Finally, I found someone who didn't turn away. She was old. So old her skin looked like parchment, eyes watery and rimmed with red. She sat on a crooked bench under a tree that was half dead, with black leaves clinging to brittle branches. I approached slowly, cautiously. She didn't look at me at first, just stared off at something far beyond the forest line. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Do you know anything about the cathedral?" Her eyes moved just slightly, and her lips began to tremble. "You're the window man," she said in a whisper. "The one fixing the glass." "Yes," I answered. "My name is Carl. I'm just working there for a few weeks." Her eyes finally met mine. None of them ever finish. A cold chill ran through my back. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into a worn satchel at her side and pulled out something wrapped in yellowed cloth. She handed it to me. Inside was a tiny pendant, an iron cross, bent at the top, with something etched along its edges. A language I didn't recognize. "Wear it when it chimes," she said. "When what chimes?" "The bell. The third chime. If it rings 3 times, it means he's loose." "Who's loose?" Her eyes turned sharp. Wet, but sharp. "You talk too loud. You ask too much. You stay too long. That place eats men like fire eats dry wood." I wanted to ask more, but suddenly her face changed, like a switch had flipped. She stood slowly, trembling. "You should go now," she said, backing away. "You shouldn't have come. We pretend it's not there. You should too." Before I could stop her, she hobbled off, her cane tapping against the stones as she disappeared into the shadows of a crooked house. I stood there for a long moment, pendant in hand, stomach twisting with something I couldn't name. On the walk back, clouds began to gather. The trees seemed closer than before, their branches curling like fingers. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me more than once, but when I turned, the path was empty. When I reached the cathedral gates, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Just beyond the outer chapel wall was an old marble statue of an angel. Its face was cracked, one of its wings broken. Its hands were raised, palms outward, and behind the base of the statue, a draft of cold air. I knelt to inspect it. There, beneath the weeds and moss, was a seam in the stone floor. A hidden hatch? A door? The old woman's words came back to me. "Don't look behind the statue." But I was already looking, and I was already reaching. I dug away the dirt with my fingers, heart hammering. After a few minutes, I found a rusted metal ring embedded in the ground. With a hard tug, the stone shifted slightly, just enough to reveal the edge of a stairwell descending into darkness. I didn't open it all the way. Not yet, but I knew I would. Soon. Because if this place was going to consume me, I'd rather face it in the dark than let it keep whispering behind closed doors. And maybe, just maybe, the truth lived down there. Or something worse. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One minute I was reading through one of the old journals I'd found behind the false panel in my room, and the next, I was waking up to the sound of the wind screaming against the stained glass windows. It sounded like something was clawing to get inside, or maybe to get out. It was around 2:30 in the morning, according to the cracked clock in the hallway. I remember standing by my door, the rules still pinned beside it, that yellowed parchment curling at the edges. I had broken one of them 2 nights ago by entering the catacombs after midnight. I hadn't slept properly since. And now another rule was about to break, one I swore I wouldn't even come close to. Rule number 4, never speak to the man with no eyes, even if he speaks first. The thunder was rolling low and long as I stepped into the hallway. I didn't know why I left my room. I just moved, like something had whispered in my head while I slept, something that didn't sound like my own thoughts. My feet were heavy, like I was walking underwater. I passed the prayer room, the smell of candle wax and old stone pressing against my skin. Every painting on the walls seemed to watch me. The saints' faces had chipped away, and in the cracks, I could almost see something dark bleeding through. I turned the corner and stopped. He was standing at the far end of the corridor. The man with no eyes. His robe was black and torn at the bottom, dragging across the cold floor. His face was pale, almost gray, and completely smooth where his eyes should have been. Just skin. No sockets. No lids. Just skin stretched tight across his face. And still somehow, I knew he was staring at me. "Carl," he said. His voice didn't echo, but I felt it inside me, like it was spoken through my bones. I froze. My throat dried up instantly. He stepped forward. "Carl, the door is open." I turned to run. My legs didn't move. Not fear. Something else was holding me. "The door is open," he said again, slower this time, as if savoring each word. "And they will feed." My mouth moved on its own. "What door?" The moment I said it, I knew I had broken the rule. The man smiled, if you could call it that. His mouth didn't widen. It stretched. Long and unnatural. lips tearing slightly at the corners. He raised his hand and pointed behind me. And suddenly, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. The walls around me dissolved into darkness. Cold, thick darkness, like I was dropped into the belly of the earth. I was standing in a massive stone chamber. High ceiling, black candles burning with blue flames. An altar made of bones. Atop the altar was me. I was lying there, eyes closed, hands folded across my chest. But I was also watching. I stepped closer and saw blood leaking from my nose down into my ears. My mouth twitched like I was mumbling something. The air around me pulsed. A heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Heavy, ancient. Behind the altar stood a door. Not a regular one. It looked like it had been carved straight into reality. Twisting symbols, bleeding cracks, voices whispering from the seams. The symbols looked alive, writhing like worms in oil. The man with no eyes appeared beside me again. He leaned in, and I felt his breath, icy and sour, on my ear. "You are the key, Carl. The others were only hammers. You unlock." My head burned. Images flooded my mind. Father Bernardo in a circle of flame. The villagers wearing masks made of stitched flesh. A woman with a rosary choking on black smoke. My own hands holding a blade dripping with something that hissed against stone. Then I was back in the hallway. But something was wrong. The corridor looked stretched too long. The paintings on the wall were bleeding from the eyes. The air smelled like iron and rot. And worse, my mouth still moved, whispering words I didn't understand. Latin? Aramaic? Something far older. I stumbled back into my room and slammed the door shut. My breath was shallow. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked the rules again, hoping maybe I had imagined it. But rule number 4 had changed. It was no longer a warning. Now it read, "You have spoken. You cannot be unheard." I sat down on the bed, afraid to blink. Afraid to sleep. Afraid that the door, whatever it was now opening somewhere deep in the bones of this church. And I had just turned the key. The next morning, the world outside my window looked the same. Gray fog, crooked trees, and birds that never sang. But something inside the cathedral had changed. I could feel it in my skin. The air felt thicker, heavier, like I was walking through someone else's breath. The rules were no longer just rules. They were warnings. I hadn't slept. Not really. My eyes had closed, sure, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck in the vision I'd seen when I spoke to the man with no eyes. That altar. That blood. Me stretched across stone like an offering. Every time I blinked, I saw it again. And in the corners of the vision, always Bernardo. He was hiding something. I waited until after breakfast. Bernardo sat at the long wooden table, eating in silence as he always did, cutting into boiled eggs like he was performing a delicate surgery. He didn't look up when I walked in, just nodded once, as though he expected me. "Did you sleep?" he asked without lifting his eyes. "Better than I should have," I lied. He gave a slight smile, the kind that never touches the eyes. "Then the cathedral is being merciful." I said nothing. I ate quickly, even though every bite tasted like ash. Then I made an excuse to check on the windows, picked up my satchel, and headed not toward the chapel, but toward the eastern hall, the one I'd been warned not to enter. The door was locked, of course. A massive iron thing with a rusty cross bolted in the center. I reached into my satchel, pulled out a chisel, and gently tapped around the frame. Years of decay had weakened the wood just enough. After 10 minutes, the door gave with a groan, like it was sighing awake. Inside was darkness, but not the usual kind. This wasn't the absence of light. It was the presence of something else. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the black, revealing a spiral staircase that went down, much deeper than the church's blueprints suggested. I hesitated. My heart was trying to crawl up my throat, but I forced it down. One step, then another. The air grew colder with each step. I began to see carvings on the walls, symbols, circles, shapes I didn't understand but somehow recognized. They hurt to look at for too long. At the bottom, I found another door. Smaller, wooden, nailed shut from the outside. I pried it open, and that's when I found it. Bernardo's secret room. At first glance, it looked like a study, old books, shelves, and scrolls stacked in crooked piles. But the smell hit me next, rot, copper, and something sweeter, like flowers left too long in water. I stepped in, covering my nose. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves held things. Jars. Inside them, preserved organs floated in dark fluid. I couldn't tell if they were human. Some looked too large, others too small. One of them, God help me, it blinked. My knees went weak, but I didn't turn back. I walked to the desk. It was made of dark wood and covered in open books. Not modern ones. These were handwritten, some in Latin, others in languages I didn't recognize. Symbols repeated across many of the pages. One stood out, an eye with no pupil. The same symbol carved behind the statue upstairs. At the center of the desk was a leather-bound book, larger than the others. I opened it. It was a journal, and the handwriting was Bernardo's. The first page was dated over 30 years ago. The seal grows weak. The prayers alone no longer hold. Blood must be offered to renew the binding, as it was written by the first warden. I turned the page. They send workers under the lie of restoration. But the cathedral needs more than stone. It needs silence, obedience, flesh. My hands trembled. He waits in the pit. Veltsurith, the sleeper in chains. I hear him in my dreams. Soon, the blood moon returns. The offering must be willing, or at least believing. There were sketches too. One of a circle carved with Latin phrases. Another showed a figure, human-shaped but wrong, bound in chains that looked like thorned vines. A final drawing showed an altar, and someone lying on it. Me. It was me. The face. The eyes. The scar on my chin. He'd drawn me before I'd even arrived. I staggered back. My flashlight caught a corner of the room I hadn't noticed. A wall of photographs. Each picture showed a man, some young, some old, standing in front of the cathedral. All wore the same hopeful smile I had when I first arrived. Names were written beneath them. Dates too. The most recent one was from 2 years ago. The man's name was Thomas Ellerby. The journal mentioned him. Thomas broke the third rule. He touched the basin. The veil consumed him by dawn. I stumbled out of the room, nearly tripping on the stairs in my rush to escape. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against the cold stone. Bernardo wasn't just a priest. He was the gatekeeper of something ancient, something evil. And I was never brought here to restore anything. I was the next name in his journal. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in my bed, listening to the whispers in the walls. And for the first time, I began to understand what they were saying. I didn't sleep that night. After what I saw in Bernardo's chambers, those ancient books, the bone-handled dagger, and that sketch of the demon with too many eyes and too few limbs, I couldn't close my eyes for more than a few seconds before something stirred in the shadows. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing slowly, like I was hiding from something just outside the room. My hands trembled as I held the parchment I'd taken from the journal I found in the attic. The translation had been rough, but the meaning was clear enough. The ritual was coming. A blood moon. 3 nights from now. And I wasn't just some unlucky outsider caught in a web of strange local superstitions. I was chosen. The thought curled like smoke in my brain, thick and heavy. I thought back to the rules on the wall, how I had broken them without hesitation. Entering the catacombs at night. Talking to the man with no eyes. Disrupting the silence during the storm. Each rule wasn't superstition. Each was a warning disguised as obedience. They had been grooming me since I arrived. And Bernardo, he never stopped smiling. That morning, I went to breakfast in the small, stone-floored dining hall. The food was always the same, plain bread, boiled eggs, and black coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through ash. Bernardo sat across from me, his fingers folded neatly on the table. The candlelight flickered across his pale face, casting long shadows down his cheeks. "You didn't sleep," he said without asking. "I read," I replied. He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "It's a good time for reading," he murmured, sipping from a chipped cup. "The moon grows fat. Soon she will bleed." I felt my stomach turn. He didn't speak like a man anymore. He spoke like a script read 1,000 times, memorized and recited without thought, as if he had long since given up his own voice. "What happens on the blood moon?" I asked. His eyes met mine. For a long second, there was silence. No birds chirped. No wind outside. Even the candle flames froze. "The veil thins," he said at last, "and what was sealed may beg to be loosed." I tried to hold his gaze, but I couldn't. I stared down at my plate, suddenly afraid to even blink. My hands were clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms. Later that day, I ventured back into the chapel. The stained glass windows I had come to restore had all turned dark. I don't mean they were dirty or cracked, they were simply dark. The light behind them no longer shone through, like someone had painted the sun black. I touched one of the windows with my palm, and it felt warm, like a heartbeat. In the center of the chapel, where the altar stood, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The floor had been cleared of its usual carpets. The stone underneath was engraved, an enormous circular symbol made up of rings and lines that twisted around a central eye. The eye, the same one from the sketches in the journal. I stepped back, heartbeat stuttering. That night, I locked my door. I pushed the dresser in front of it. I wedged the chair under the handle. I turned off the oil lamp and curled up on the bed, clutching the bone-handled dagger I'd stolen from Bernardo's chamber. And still the knocking came. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. But this time, there was no whispering. No voice trying to mimic mine. Just breathing. On the other side of the door. Deep. Slow. Patient. It stayed there for hours. When the morning came, I removed the dresser with shaking arms and stepped outside. The hallway was empty, but the smell of incense and blood hung in the air. Downstairs, the villagers had arrived. Dozens of them. They stood silently in the chapel pews. Faces I'd seen in the village. The butcher. The old woman with the milky eye. Even the girl who had once dropped apples when I passed. All dressed in black. All barefoot. All staring toward the altar. I stayed hidden behind a column, watching as Bernardo raised his hands and began to chant in a language I didn't know. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard. The sound was low, guttural, more like growling than speech. The villagers joined in, their voices shaking the walls. The circle on the floor began to glow faintly red. I left before the ritual ended. I ran to the attic, to the journals. I flipped through them, desperate, my hands smudging ink and crumbling pages. Then I found it. A single sentence underlined 3 times. The offering must be willing or broken. That's what the ritual needed. Not just any man. Not just a stranger. A seeker. One who asked too many questions. One who stepped where he shouldn't. One who dared to know. Me. They had chosen me before I ever arrived. My resume, my emails, the job posting, it was bait. And I took it. I sat back, my breath caught in my throat. I could hear the chanting downstairs again, even from the attic. But this time it wasn't just sound. It was a pull, like something was tugging at the corners of my soul. The blood moon was coming. And I had 3 nights left to stop whatever they were trying to unleash, or become a part of it. Forever. The woods didn't look the same anymore. When I stepped past the rusted iron gates of the cathedral, and onto the dirt path leading away, something shifted. I don't know how to describe it exactly, just that the trees looked taller, closer together, like they'd leaned in to watch me run. I had no plan, only a deep animal instinct screaming at me to leave. My heart was still racing from what I'd read in those cursed books, what Bernardo was planning to do, and what I was to him. The final offering. The words stuck to the back of my throat like ash. I followed the gravel road back toward the village, clutching my bag, half expecting one of those black-robed villagers to leap out and drag me back. But no one came. Only wind, thick and low, hissing through the trees like it was speaking a language I wasn't meant to understand. For the first hour, I walked fast. By the second, I was jogging. And by the third, I was no longer sure I was going the right way at all. That's when I saw it, my own muddy footprints, already ahead of me on the trail. I froze. I hadn't looped around. I hadn't turned. I'd been walking in a straight line. I was sure of it, but there they were, the very same boot prints. Same pattern. Same depth. The edges still fresh like they were made just minutes ago. And right next to them, another set. Bare feet. Smaller. Childlike. Running alongside mine. I didn't stop to think. I just turned around and ran. But again, after what felt like 20 minutes, there was the cathedral in the distance. The towers stabbing up through the fog like crooked teeth. I should have been miles away by now. Instead, I'd somehow circled back. I collapsed to my knees. The air felt thicker here, like it was pushing down on my shoulders. The wind was gone. The birds were silent. And even the insects didn't dare make a sound. It was just me, and the trees, and something watching. I forced myself up and checked my phone. No signal. The compass app spun in lazy circles, refusing to point in any direction. GPS? Blank. Just a gray screen. I stood still, eyes shut, breathing deep. Okay. Maybe it was stress. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I picked a different direction entirely. South, I guessed, using the sun as my only guide. This time I cut straight through the woods, no path. Just thorns, roots, and fallen branches. Every few steps, I turned around to check behind me. Still nothing. Then I heard a whisper. Soft. Guttural. My name. Carl. I whipped around. Nothing. I kept going. Quicker now. Carl, come back? It was behind me. Closer. I could feel the breath on my neck, though no one was there. Carl, the forest isn't yours. I turned and shouted, leave me alone. Silence. And then laughter. Childlike. Echoing. Not from one voice, but many. Dozens. All around me. Buried in the trees. Crawling under the bark. I ran again, not knowing where I was going. Branches tore at my face. Roots caught my boots. I stumbled, fell, got up. Ran again. And then I saw it. My car. Right there, in the middle of a clearing. At first, I didn't believe it. Thought it was a mirage, a hallucination. But as I got closer, my legs slowed. My breath caught. It was my car, yes. The same rust-colored van I'd driven from Bucharest. Same license plate. Same air freshener dangling from the mirror. But it was wrong. It was old. Rusted out. The windshield cracked like a spider web. Tires deflated. Paint peeled and flaking off. There were dry leaves piled under the hood. Moss growing along the windows. As if it had been here for years. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the hood. Freezing cold. I backed away, shaking. My bag slid from my shoulder and hit the ground with a dull thud. A whisper came again, this time from behind the car. You came back too late, Carl. I didn't want to look. But I did. Standing just past the trees, shoulder deep in shadow, was a figure. Tall. Unmoving. No eyes. Just dark hollows in its face. The man from the catacombs. He lifted one hand and pointed, back toward the cathedral. Then he vanished. No footsteps. No rustle. Just gone. And somehow, I knew I had no choice. I picked up my bag. Walked back the way I came. My body moved on its own, like my will was no longer mine. The woods parted for me. The mist curled like fingers guiding me. By the time the cathedral rose again before me, I wasn't surprised. Just numb. I stepped through the gates, and they groaned shut behind me. This place didn't want me to leave. And worse, I was beginning to understand why. Something had started the moment I stepped foot in this place. Something old. Something patient. And it was waiting for the blood moon. For me. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was in my room, pacing like a man waiting for his own execution. The next, I was waking up in total darkness. My arms were heavy. My legs felt like stone. Something coarse and tight bit into my wrists and ankles. Rope. Old rope. It smelled like mildew, rust, and dried blood. I blinked, and the shadows began to shape themselves into familiar walls. I was in the cathedral, but not in the sanctuary or the catacombs. This room was different. It was circular, high-ceilinged, with stained glass windows that had never seen sunlight. They glowed red, no, pulsed red, with the light of the rising blood moon outside. The light shimmered unnaturally, like something alive crawling behind the glass. Candles lined the walls. Hundreds of them. Each flame flickered with a blue hue, casting strange colors across the stone. In the center of the room was the altar. And I was on it. Cold marble touched my back. My shirt was gone. Symbols had been painted across my chest in something dark and sticky, blood or something worse. I tried to scream, but a strip of cloth had been shoved into my mouth. My voice came out as a weak, muffled cry. That's when I heard the chanting. Low at first, then louder, rhythmic, in a language I couldn't understand, but that my bones seemed to recognize. It came from every direction, behind the walls, under the floor, from the very air. I lifted my head, and there they were. The villagers. They stood around the altar in wide rings. Dozens of them, wrapped in thick, ash-colored robes. Faces hidden under hoods. Some clutched wooden staffs. Others held candles that dripped wax onto their hands. None flinched. None blinked. All of them swayed to the chant, like wheat in an invisible breeze. And then I saw him. Father Bernardo stepped into the center. He was wearing robes, too, but his were crimson, marked with silver thread. On his head was a crown made of twisted iron thorns. He held a thick book in one hand, and a long ceremonial dagger in the other. He moved toward me like a man performing a sacred dance. He stopped beside me and looked down. Smiled. I told you, Carl, he whispered, placing a warm hand on my forehead. You were chosen. Not by me. By him. The room responded with a guttural groan. The stone trembled beneath the altar. The chanting grew louder. Somewhere in the walls, I heard scraping. Something was waking up. Bernardo raised the book and began reciting verses. Not verses from the Bible, not anything human. The words hissed and cracked as they left his lips. My ears rang. Blood dripped from my nose. The candle flames grew taller, stretching like arms. When he raised the dagger, I saw it clearly for the first time. Its blade was black, not painted, but as if it had been carved from night itself. The handle was bone, and etched into it were the same symbols I had seen in the catacombs, in the journals, on the altar in my visions. Veltsurith. I thrashed against the ropes, screamed through the gag. Bernardo didn't flinch. With this offering, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally, we complete the binding. With his blood, the gate shall open, and he will be free to walk. The crowd screamed something in unison. A name. A howl. A shriek that pierced the veil of the world. The blade touched my chest. That's when the candlelight flickered. It happened fast, just for a moment, but all the flames bent away from the altar, as if something else had entered the room. Then came the sound. A whisper, low, female, delicate. It came from my left, behind one of the pillars. I couldn't see her, but I recognized the voice. It was the one I'd heard in the dream corridor as a boy. The one that said my name in the catacombs. She whispered it again now. Carl. The ropes loosened. Bernardo didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the dagger, his lips moving in silent prayer. I yanked my right arm free. He noticed then. I grabbed the dagger. Our hands clashed. He screamed, but I twisted my wrist, driving the blade upward into his side. Not deep, but enough. He staggered back, clutching his ribs, gasping. The chanting broke. Confusion rippled through the crowd. And then the cathedral screamed. I don't know how else to describe it. The walls groaned. The ceiling cracked. Stained glass exploded inward in slow-motion shards. The very stones under the altar shifted like muscle beneath skin. Something beneath us was waking. Something ancient. Something angry. Bernardo, still bleeding, backed away from me with wild eyes. He pointed a trembling finger. You fool! You've unsealed the binding. I looked down at the altar. The blood symbols on my chest glowed. The marble split opened beneath me like a mouth. Red light poured from the cracks. A wind whipped through the cathedral, but it wasn't made of air, it was made of voices. Thousands. Wailing. Begging. Laughing. The villagers dropped to their knees, chanting once more, but this time in panic, not worship. I stumbled off the altar and ran. The floor broke open behind me. A hand the size of a man's torso clawed through the stone. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something worse, skinless, slick, its fingers far too long. I ran through the aisle, dodging collapsing pillars and flying debris. The cathedral was collapsing, and something was coming through. Veltsurith. I didn't look back, but I could hear it laugh. Not a growl, not a roar, a laugh, and it knew my name. The altar stone beneath my back was cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt. My wrists were bound tight with rough rope, and the coppery scent of blood lingered in the air. Not just mine. There were stains here, deep, dark ones, that had soaked into the stone years ago. Centuries, maybe. Above me, the ceiling of the cathedral twisted in a silent spiral, shadows swirling where stained glass should have caught the moonlight. But tonight there was no light. Only the red hue of the blood moon bleeding through thick clouds. Bernardo stood at the head of the altar, dressed in a black robe stitched with crimson thread. His eyes weren't just empty now, they were glowing faintly, as though something inside him had finally awakened. You were always meant to be the vessel, he said, voice deep and hollow, like two voices layered together. The seeker. The last sacrifice. The door. I struggled against the ropes, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it echoing off the cathedral walls. The villagers, no, the cultists, stood around us in a circle, their faces hidden by hoods. Each held a candle. The flames didn't flicker. They just hovered, still and unnatural. Don't do this, I croaked, throat dry from the sleeping draft they'd poured down my throat. You don't have to. You've already accepted it, Bernardo said, smiling faintly. You broke the rules. You saw the eyeless man. You stepped beyond the veil. There's no going back. He lifted the dagger, an old, rusted thing with strange symbols etched along its blade, and raised it above my chest. That's when I felt the weight in my boot. The dagger I'd stolen from his hidden chamber. I'd hidden it there before they'd taken me. Just in case. As Bernardo chanted in that horrible, backwards-tongued prayer, I twisted my foot, reached down with my bound hands, and dragged the small blade out. He didn't notice until it was too late. With all the strength I had left, I sat up and drove the dagger into his side. His scream wasn't human. It echoed through the cathedral like the roar of a collapsing building, shaking dust from the rafters. The villagers stepped back, gasping, some dropping their candles. The red flame didn't extinguish. It crawled across the stone, as if alive. Bernardo staggered backward, clutching his side. Black smoke poured from the wound. He looked at me not with rage, but with fear. "You fool," he hissed. "You've broken the seal." And then, everything changed. The ground beneath us cracked open with a deep, grinding sound, like a mouth opening for the first time in centuries. The altar split. The stone floor crumbled, revealing a chasm underneath glowing with that same blood-red light. Symbols on the cathedral walls began to twist and move, slithering like worms. The cultists screamed, some trying to run, but the church turned on itself. The pews bent. The windows shattered inward. A wind howled through the cathedral, thick with ash and whispers. I was on my knees now, staring into the pit that had opened beneath the altar. And in that pit, something stirred. I saw it. Veltsurith. It didn't have a shape, not really. It was a mass of moving shadow, with hundreds of faces flickering in and out, screaming, crying, laughing. Some of the faces looked like the ones from the journals I found. One of them looked like me. Chains of light tried to hold it down, glowing with sacred symbols. But they were breaking, one by one. Bernardo was crawling toward the pit, blood trailing behind him. "You've doomed us all," he whispered. "You were supposed to finish the ritual, not disrupt it." The shadows reached for him. He didn't even scream this time. He just disappeared, swallowed whole. I backed away, stumbling over the crumbling floor. The church was alive now, pulsing like a heart. The walls bled. The statues cried black tears. The choir loft above collapsed, narrowly missing me. Then a voice echoed inside my head. "You opened the rift." It wasn't Bernardo's voice. It wasn't even human. "Now choose, Carl." I stood frozen at the edge of the pit. The air was thick with heat and sulfur and something colder than death. I felt the choice pressing against my chest like a blade. Seal the rift, by offering myself to it. To take Bernardo's place. To become the guardian. The chained soul keeping Veltsurith bound. Or run. Run like hell, and hope whatever came through wouldn't find me. Wouldn't follow. My body trembled. My mind split itself in two. Every memory I had flickered through me like lightning. My mother's voice, my father's silence. The quiet days I spent restoring broken stained glass in forgotten churches. I had never believed in demons. Not until I saw one. The ground cracked again. More chains snapped. I had to decide. And fast. Because Veltsurith was waking. And it was hungry. The altar beneath me cracked like dry bones under a boot. I felt the breath of something ancient moving through the stone. Not air, not wind, but awareness. Like the cathedral itself was watching me, judging me, waiting. Bernardo lay slumped nearby, his blood soaking into the very symbols he had once used to summon protection. His eyes flicked open one last time. There was no rage in them, no fear. Just relief. He whispered something too soft to catch, and then he was gone. A hollow shell. A broken priest. But the ritual wasn't over. I turned slowly, my legs trembling, my body barely able to carry me. The villagers, or whatever they were now, had vanished. The cloaked bodies that had chanted so loudly only moments before were nothing but robes crumpled on the floor, as if the people inside them had simply dissolved into ash. Then I heard it, from deep below the altar, breathing. Not heavy, not fast. Just constant. Measured. Inhale. Exhale. Like a sleeping giant preparing to wake. I stumbled down into the crypts. My hand brushed along cold stone walls slick with condensation and something thicker, darker. The torch I'd taken from the altar sputtered as I descended. The air grew heavy like it was made of iron. At the bottom, the chamber opened, and I saw it. Chains of silver light wrapped around a form that refused to hold its shape. One moment it looked like a man, the next a shadow with horns. Then a mass of mouths whispering in unison. I dropped to my knees, my mind struggling to keep hold of itself. Veltsurith. The name wasn't just a word. It echoed in my chest like a scream buried alive. The demon didn't speak aloud, but it spoke inside me. Thoughts that weren't mine crept in. You are already mine. There is no seal. There is no rule. Only delay. I clutched the old dagger, still slick with Bernardo's blood. The journals hadn't told me how to kill it, only how to contain it. One phrase had been underlined in every single entry. Only one may hold the gate. Bernardo had held it for decades. Before him, others. Each had been chosen. Or tricked. Or broken into obedience. And now it was my turn. I stepped forward. The demon didn't resist. It wanted me closer. "You can go," It whispered in a voice that sounded like my father's. No one will blame you. They never do. I stood before the seal, a circular groove carved into the ground. The relic dagger fit perfectly into a small crevice in the center. I raised it high, then pressed the blade against my own palm. The moment blood touched the stone, the chains tightened around the demon with a sound like screaming metal. It thrashed, shifted, screamed, laughed. I screamed too, my body lit with fire from within, every bone vibrating. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. I saw lives I never lived, places I never went, deaths I didn't die. And then, stillness, silence. I opened my eyes. My body was kneeling on the ground, motionless, yet I stood just above it, like smoke trailing from a dying candle. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't alive either. I was bound. A new chain formed, one that started from the seal and ended in my chest. The demon stopped struggling. It looked at me now with something like respect. "You've bought them time," it said. "But time always runs out." I turned away. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. And so, I returned to the catacombs. The cathedral let me move through it now like I belonged to it. Maybe I did. The blood moon faded. The light returned. But the villagers never came back. The roads never reopened. Time here feels different. Hours stretch into days. Days blur into memory. I found the journals again. The old ones. The broken ones. And I added mine. I used a rusted nail to carve into the wall, above the others. My name is Carl. I came to restore windows. I left with my soul cracked wide open. Underneath that, I etched one final warning. For whoever comes next. If you've found this, follow the rules. Don't answer the knocking. Don't look behind the statue. And never, ever speak to the man with no eyes. I paused. My hand ached. My mind burned. But I wasn't done yet. Because I had one more thing to say. I didn't walk away. No one ever does.